Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. I'd like to present 2 rules that you can apply to your Dungeons & Dragons games today, but I'd also like to see introduced into the 6th edition of Dungeons & Dragons whenever it may come out. These 2 new rules change the way combat works in a simple but profound way. Allow me to explain. I'd like to change the way that armor works for your enemies. So this is a rule that only really applies to non-player characters at the moment, but it's quite simple. Any NPC wearing light armor blocks 5 points of bludgeoning damage. That means any damage they take that's bludgeoning is reduced by 5. It doesn't affect any other damage types, just bludgeoning. Conversely, targets wearing medium armor have their slashing damage reduced by 5 points, and targets in heavy armor have piercing damage reduced by 5 points. This applies to both magical and non-magical damage. This reduction also scales with tier of play. So at tier 2, that's levels 6 through 10, you'd be reducing the damage by 10 points. At tier 3, it would be reduced by 15, and in tier 4, it's reduced by 20 points of damage. Why introduce a rule like this? Well, it's quite simple. It gives players a reason to change the weapons that they're using. If you find that your target is blocking a reasonable proportion of the damage that your weapon is doing, you might be encouraged to use a different weapon. Now, a lot of players are very specialized. They have their favorite weapon and they use it almost exclusively. This might make them use something else, and it introduces an element to the game where you are now actively wanting to change which weapon you're using. You're also changing the way your character is built, so you're not so hyper-specialized. This may reduce the total amount of damage your character can do, because a specialized character just does more damage. But a specialized character ends up doing the same thing every time. By encouraging your players to make a more general character, they're going to be changing what they're doing, thinking about the different options available to them, and probably having more fun in the process. Ultimately, I'd like to see a system where the different types of armor also have a benefit to the player characters. So it's not just simply a case of working out which one gives me the highest AC. I'd like features where there's a balancing act. This one gives me a higher AC, but the other one gives me a better something else. And including some sort of damage reduction into the mechanics is probably a good way to do it. But right now, this is just a really simple little thing for your players. If something's wearing natural armor, I'd probably consider that light or medium, but really that's up to you. Maybe fur is natural, scales is medium, and a shell is hard. You figure that out yourself. But that's something that you can introduce right now, and it will change the way your players approach combat. If they know that a target has a resistance to a certain type of damage, they're more likely to try and use a different attack against it. The second idea is something that's going to make combat easier for you and reduce the amount of bookkeeping you have to do. Enemies don't have hit points. Wow, that's a big statement. Instead, give them damage points, which work almost the same way. A damage point represents about 10 hit points. So you can scale this quite easily. An enemy that has about 10 hit points would have about 1 damage point. An enemy that has about 100 hit points would have about 10 damage points. And what you do is you round all incoming damage to the nearest 10. And then you just mark off how many damage points each target has taken. If an attack does less than 5 points of damage, it means you ignore it. The hit happens, any effects that trigger on a hit still happen, but you don't have to deal with bookkeeping for just 1 or 2 points of damage. And if a creature only has 1 damage point, as soon as it takes a hit that does 5 or more damage, because 5's rounded up to 10, it's dead. There's a lot less bookkeeping, a lot less tracking of hit points. So round all damage to the nearest 10, and just use damage points, with each damage point representing 10 hit points. I think this is perhaps a good way to handle combat, especially when there's lots of combatants. It reduces the bookkeeping load on the games master. It somewhat reduces the fine granularity of the game, but when you're dealing with a large combat, granularity is just going to slow things down. So if it makes the game faster, it reduces the amount of bookkeeping, and it doesn't really affect player agency, I think that's probably a good thing. Now, these two ideas together make a really big difference, because if you've got the wrong type of weapon and you're taking a 5-point reduction in your damage to the target, and you need to do at least 5 points of damage for it to take even a single damage point, you've now got a really good justification to use a different weapon. And that's what I'm trying to encourage players to do, so that they are using more than one tool from their toolbox. Ideally, I'd like to have a situation where the player's going to go, okay, that goblin in heavy armor, I'm going to hit it with my warhammer, and then that goblin over there with the leather coat, I'm going to pull my dagger and stab it in the guts. So you've now got a narrative type of combat where players are justifying changing weapons and changing attack types from one target to another. If you want to give these rules a go, please do, and let me know what your table thinks about them. I'd love to hear feedback on this. And whether you do it or not, enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.